Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. This is the explained article from this week, Supreme Court Directions on Hate Speech. How the courts have read IPC Section 295A and other provisions. Supreme Court recently, in an interim judgment, has directed the police chiefs of Delhi, Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand to take immediate suo motu actions against any hate speech by lodging a criminal case without waiting for formal complaints. Before we come to section 295A, let's do a little bit of basic. According to 267th report of the Law Commission of India, hate speech is an incitement to hatred, primarily against a group of persons defined in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, and the likes. The cases of hate speech, according to the data of National Crime Record Bureau, has been on the rise. According to NCRB data, the number of cases lodged on the ground of hate speech was 323 in 2014. This number rose to 1804 in 2020. We shall divide our discussion of hate speech with regard to GS Paper 2 and GS Paper 4. In the context of GS Paper 2, we'll try and understand the legal framework concerning hate speech. And in discussion with regard to GS Paper 4, we'll touch on the ethical aspect of hate speech. Well, you would know that India does not have a formal legal framework for dealing with hate speech. However, there are a set of provisions in Indian Penal Code that loosely defines hate speech. But these hate speeches, they are primarily against religious sentiments. But we have just seen that the definition of Law Commission of India concerning hate speech is much broader. It covers race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and factors like these as well. But howsoever, presently we do not have an overarching legal architecture concerning hate speech for all these factors. What we primarily have with regard to hate speech is Section 295A of IPC. This section defines and prescribes a punishment for deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage the religious feelings or sentiments. It says that whosoever with deliberate and malicious intent of outraging the religious feelings of any class of citizens by words either spoken or written or by signs or by visible representation or otherwise insults, attempts to insult the religious or religious beliefs shall be punished with imprisonment. And then it gives the term of imprisonment as well. Section 295A, this is one of the main provision in the IPC to penalize religious offense. Although there are other sections as well which we will not at all delve into. However, the state often invokes other sections along with Section 295A. For example, Section 153A. Section 153A of IPC penalizes promoting enmity between different groups on grounds of religion, race, place of birth, residence, language, etc. or doing acts prejudicial to maintenance of harmony. Section 505 of IPC are also used along these sections, which calls for punishment for any statements conducing for public mischief. And also if these things are done online, then you know that Section 66A of IT Acts also used to be invoked. Well, this Section 295A is pretty old one. This section was brought about during the time of colonial regime in 1927. Before Section 295A, there used to be Section 153A to take care of hurting religious sentiments. But there was a judgment by Punjab and Haryana High Court in early 1920s that dismissed a petition against religious sentiment, and that latter resulted into public outrage and violence. So the Lahore High Court latter held that scurrilous and foul attack on religious leaders would prima facie fall under Section 153A. Previously, the Punjab and Haryana High Court made a distinction between criticizing a religious leader or religious figure and hurting religious sentiment. And there was disagreement between Punjab and Haryana High Court and the Lahore High Court that whether criticizing a religious figure, a historical figure, will amount to hurting religious sentiment or not. The stand of Lahore High Court was that sacrilege and foul attack on religious leader would prima facie come under the category of hurting religious sentiment to be dealt by section 153A of the IPC. But there were lots of debate and discussion and confusion even in the judicial realm. And hence in 1927 an amendment was done by the colonial regime. But interpretation of section 295A has also been done gradually by the courts. In the Ramji Lal Modi versus State of Uttar Pradesh case in 1957, Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of section 295A. Supreme Court said that public order is an exception to the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression, and also to protect the right to religion granted to the citizen by the Constitution. So Supreme Court clearly said that Article 19(2) allows for reasonable limits on freedom of speech and expression for the sake of public order. Later in 1960, in the Baba Khalil Ahmed versus State of Uttar Pradesh, Supreme Court has said that malicious intent of the accused can be determined not just by the speech in question, but also from external sources. And later you will see that Supreme Court kind of corrected the balance in favor of freedom of speech and liberty. In 1973, and you must remember a few of these cases, at least the Ramji Lal Modi case and the Ram Lal Puri versus State of Madhya Pradesh case. Or simply you remember Ram Lal Puri case. In Ram Lal Puri case, Supreme Court said that the test that one must apply to consider the speech of someone, whether it's hate speech or not, is this. The speech in question, whether that offends the ordinary man of common sense and not whether it is offending a hypersensitive man. But this test must be applied only by judiciary. Ram Lal Puri case, you can say, was an inflection point in the freedom of speech and liberty of citizens. In 2007, in Baragur Ramchandrapuram versus State of Karnataka case, Supreme Court adopted a pragmatic approach. Supreme Court said that it is adopting a pragmatic approach, and the approach is that to restore public order, forfeiture of a book over individual interest of freedom of speech should be considered. Clearly, Supreme Court gave precedence to public order over individual interest of free speech. So to maintain public order, authors can forfeit their right to publish books if there is a concern of violation of public order. But you see, this stand was also moved towards free speech and liberty of individuals latter. In Ranga Rajan versus P. Jagjeevan Ram case, you must remember this case. Supreme Court said that mere threat to public order cannot be the ground to suppress freedom of expression. And in Virendra versus State of Punjab case, Supreme Court said that for ban on books, there must be substantive reasonableness and procedural reasonableness. Without these factors, individual freedom of speech, individual liberty cannot be scuttled. In 2011, Supreme Court concluded that only speech that amounts to incitement to impending unlawful action can be punished. The state must meet a very high bar before using public disturbance as a justification for suppressing expression. And you know that recently Supreme Court has given spate of judgments where individual freedom and liberty has been upheld against the social demand for conformity. So Supreme Court obviously has tilted the balance towards individual freedom of expression and liberty against public order or demand for public morality. But now, as this judicial and legal stand has been propounded and progressed by the courts, the question is, how do you manage hate speech? So the balance now needs to be recorrected, and some restrictions must come concerning individual freedom of free speech and liberty. Only then the judicial interpretation and innovation will come a full circle. Now we'll have discussion on the same topic concerning GS Paper 4. Jonathan and Maynard in their work have identified hate speech as important catalyst for mass violence. They also have cited that in the UN War Crimes Tribunal for the war crime that happened in Rwanda, hate speech was identified as one important factor for the genocide that happened in Rwanda. From the perspective and the purpose of our examination, this model I have discussed with you multiple times in previous DNS. The thing is that human behavior comes from attitude, attitude comes from our value system develops based on emotions. And emotion in human beings can come in two various ways. One is our cognition, the information that we hold. Your emotion develops as a reaction to the information that is given to you. And in long term, the knowledge that you have, the wisdom that you have developed. Suppose if government's advisory comes to be safe because of a possible bomb blast or terrorist attack in the area that you're living, then immediately you will have some emotion of fear, panic. If before examination you are pleased to learn that the examination date has been extended, then you may feel happy, elated if you were not well prepared. If you come to think about it, from morning to evening, your emotion, your mood, everything depends on the information that you're possessing. That is one reason why fake news is destructive, because fake news by nature is having fake information, wrong cognition that will develop wrong emotion or negative emotion. There is one additional aspect to this. Emotion in human beings is also developed as a reaction to emotion of others. For example, if an old lady comes and starts crying in front of you because of the misery and difficulty she's facing, then you will also develop some emotion, perhaps sympathy or even empathy. If father tells on his deathbed to his son something, son receives not just the information, but that information is wrapped up with lots of emotion because it is coming from the father at that juncture of his life. The point is that cognition develops emotion, but emotion is also developed by emotion of the person giving the information. If you receive the information that people of certain community have gathered at a place, and because of that there has been further spread of COVID-19 in the society. If you receive this information, you will understand that the people of the community, the leaders, they have acted irresponsibly. You will develop certain attitude towards them, which may or may not change in the due course of time. But attitude, as you can see from this model, develops not only from cognition but also emotion. In fact, cognition and emotion are two components of attitude. It also depends the manner and the way in which you have received the information. If the person or the television news anchor has delivered the information in a very agitative manner, if you have received the information in very loud tone with disgust, shock, anger, that will create some reactionary emotion in you. You may also feel disgusted. You may also develop the negative emotion of hate. Now your attitude will be compounded. The attitude formation is not result of only information, but that is also result of negative emotion. This attitude will be very, very strong. And that will make the attitudinal change very difficult. Even if you have some positive experience later on, you get some positive information, that may not undo the negativity that you have imbibed. That may not change the negative attitude that you have already formed. So hate speech not only sometimes gives fake information, false information, inaccurate information, but it also develops negative emotion, maybe apathy or even more hate. Supreme Court in various judgment has observed that hate speech leads to marginalization of vulnerable section. Vulnerable section by its very nature definition requires more attention, more help. If by propaganda or otherwise using hate speech or other elements, apathy is developed for vulnerable section, then that will lead to easily violation of their rights. Apathy will also break the constitutional value of fraternity. Social cohesion will break down, social capital will erode, the concept of unity in diversity will get a setback, which will result in communal violence, riots, and it can escalate all the way up to genocide. It will erode ethos of the society. It will erode the concept of Vasudev Kutumbakam. It will erode the concept of Sarva Dharma Sambhav. It will erode the idea of India. That's how hatred is destructive of person's wisdom and conscience and can poison a nation's spirit. Now, what is the solution? One way of controlling negative attitude formation is social contact. In the DNS dated 7 January 2021, I have discussed with you the importance of social interaction. There we discussed the contact hypothesis given by Gordon Allport.
We understood the importance of social contact, the importance of civic engagement in developing cohesion, and also acting as a barrier against negative attitude formation. Social contact, civic engagement give you an opportunity to correct your cognition. If you have been given wrong information, then with social interaction, you come to know the right thing. You may come to know that the negative image that was developed in your mind against certain people, community, that was not correct. And interaction on personal level also create the reactive emotions. Together, they help correct your attitude. Another method to preempt speech from causing the violence is a more proactive one. It is a method that was given by Jonathan and Maynard, which is counter speech. They have said that counter speech can counter the hate speech. You must be aware that presently we have many fact check websites and they do real-time fact check, especially of politicians. Meaning if wrong information is presented in public domain, you correct it there and then. It was also suggested by Jonathan and Maynard to create a counter speech narrative. I am picking this case from their work. In Kenya in 2012, a TV drama show was created. The show was on dangerous speech. It was designed to inoculate audience against hate speech, to train the mind of audience to be skeptical about hate speeches. If somebody is presenting the information in a very agitative way, you have to be skeptical about the information that is giving, and if you are skeptical, then emotional outburst, the reactionary emotion in you because of the emotion of presenter will be very limited. Later on, as per the research work of some scholars at the University of Pennsylvania, Kenyans who watched the episodes were more skeptical about inflammatory speech than those who did not watch the episodes. See, many Indians are skeptical about politicians, especially the promises that are made before election. The negative image that many of us hold towards politicians, politics, or the poll promises, a large part of it has been developed because of media. You must have seen multiple movies presenting politicians in a bad light, highlighting their manipulations, their false promises. So when you get to read about promises of employment or housing or road construction or electrification or whatever, before election, you are not very elated, you are not excited, rather you are skeptical about it. So to fight hate speech, we have to develop counter speech, and to deal with agitative, provocative way of news presentation, which the CGI has raised a question on, we have to develop a counter way of news presentation, maybe the one that was there in Doordarshan, where news is given as information in calm and composed manner, so that the reactionary emotion is not there. Negative attitude formation, even if some facts goes wrong, is minimal, and hence the negative behavior of citizens is minimal, and nation's spirit is safeguarded.
There is an explained article, what are green crackers and how do we identify them? In order to understand the importance of green crackers, which is a kind of Madhyam Marg, let's look into the judgments of Supreme Court that necessitated the use of green crackers. There has been various judgments of High Courts and even Supreme Court banning the use of crackers. But the blanket ban is not possible because that will totally disrupt the supply chain and the employment generation by the cracker industry. Hence, green crackers comes as a balance between environment and economy. In 2015 mains examination in GS paper 2, UPSC has asked a question. Does the right to clean environment entail legal regulation on burning crackers during Diwali? Discussed in the light of Article 21 of Indian Constitution and judgments of the Apex Court in this regard. This question has asked important issues related to firecracker ban. So we will guide our discussion in the direction of what has been asked in the question. See, Supreme Court has set aside the blanket ban on firecracker, which was previously imposed by the Calcutta High Court. Supreme Court has said that its stand is consistent with its own judgment of 2018. Calcutta High Court actually has prohibited the sale, purchase, use, display of all kind of firecrackers in all type of upcoming festivals. Because of this blanket ban on sale of firecrackers, the firecracker industry filed a review petition in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has put a stay on the judgment of the Calcutta High Court. But it has set up certain rules for regulation. Many of them were already present in its own judgment of 2018. Supreme Court just has added few new regulations. In the 2018 judgment, Supreme Court has held that Article 21, that is right to life, applies to both segment of people, the firecrackers manufacturers and the people in the supply chain, and people in general. Supreme Court also said that it needs to maintain a balance while considering a countrywide ban on firecrackers. So two things. Article 21 applies to all segment of people and there has to be a balance in judgment. But Supreme Court also dismissed the argument that burning firecracker was a fundamental right. Supreme Court has been using the essential practice doctrine in identifying the important practices of religion to decide the precedence of rights of different section of people. Supreme Court has said that using firecracker is not an essential practice for the festival like Diwali. And using this essential practice doctrine, Supreme Court actually gives precedence to right to life under Article 21 over right to freedom of religion under Article 25. Also, if the religious practice is threatening the health and lives of people, such kind of practice is not entitled to get protection under Article 25. So this is 21 versus 25. Supreme Court in the judgment also declared that right to business is also not an absolute right under Article 19(1)(g). So the fundamental among all is Article 21, right to life. This is the legal idea that Supreme Court put forward. And to give effect to this, Supreme Court gave certain regulations. The court banned production and sale of all firecrackers except green crackers. As the name suggests, green crackers would be less harmful. The court held that blanket ban of firecracker is not a wise step. And the firecrackers found injurious to health, they need to be banned. Supreme Court in its regulatory measures have banned the sale of joint crackers and specifically prohibited the use of barium salt in fireworks. Heavy metals are more harmful. Supreme Court also laid down the rule that firecrackers won't be sold online and only licensed trader can sell the firecrackers. Green crackers, as the name suggests, are less dangerous, they are less harmful. There have been many scientific institutions like Central Electoral Research Institute, Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, among others. They have been developing green crackers with a name like Safe Water Releaser, Safe Thermite Cracker, STAR, Safe Minimal Aluminum, SAFAL. Just pick up this name, can be asked in the prelims exam. The science and art that goes behind making firecracker is releasing water vapor or dust suppressant. They help in absorption or restricted expansion of the gaseous emissions. But green crackers also match up the performance in terms of sound and light with conventional crackers. This is about judgment of 2018. Supreme Court has now adhered to the same judgment, but court has added that the use of green crackers would be allowed in areas where air quality is good or moderate, since the air quality index has become common in use. UPSC has asked this question in this year's mains examination in GS paper 2. The most significant achievement of modern law in India is the constitutionalization of environmental problems by the Supreme Court. Discuss this statement with the help of relevant case laws. Let's have a discussion in context of discussion asked by UPSC. Supreme Court via various judgment has established the relation between ecology and right to life under Article 21. That right to life is a fundamental right under Article 21, and since right to life also connotes quality of life, a person has the right to pollution-free air and water to enjoy the life fully. In the Dehradun quarrying case in 1998, Supreme Court recognized right to live in healthy environment as part of Article 21. This was the beginning of linking ecology with right to life. A landmark judgment, MC Mehta case. Here, Supreme Court strengthened its stand taken in Dehradun quarrying case. It said that right to live in pollution-free environment is par to life. And Supreme Court gave many doctrines and principles in this regard. Supreme Court accepted the doctrine of public trust, which rests on the premise that certain natural resources like air, sea, water are means for general use and cannot be restricted to private ownership. These resources are gift of nature and the state acts as the trustee and is duty bound to protect them. The state is the trustee and general public are beneficiary of such natural resources. Supreme Court also laid down precautionary principle, which means that the state government and the concerned authorities must anticipate, prevent, and attack the causes of environmental degradation. Polluters pay principle has been embedded in the legal jurisprudence in India. The beginning was in the MC Mehta case. The principle imposes liability on a person who pollutes the environment to compensate for the damage caused and return the environment to its original state regardless of the intent. Now, in this regard, there is a principle of absolute liability. Supreme Court has laid down this principle of absolute liability for harm to the environment. And it means that the liability extends not only to compensate the victim of pollution, but also the cost of restoration of environmental degradation. And this liability is regardless of the intent. According to absolute liability rule, there is no exception of a strict liability. Strict liability apply only in certain cases. In absolute liability, there is unlimited liability to compensate victims adequately. In Vellore's Citizen Welfare Forum case, polluter pay principle was strengthened by Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that it is essential for sustainable development. Supreme Court also clarified that the onus of proof is on the actor or the developer, the industrialist, to show that his action is environmentally benign. In the Indian Council for Enviro Legal Action, the court held that once the activity carried on is hazardous or inherently dangerous, the person carrying on such activity is liable to make good the losses caused to any other person by his activity, irrespective of the fact whether he took reasonable care while carrying on his activity. So this was again strengthening the absolute liability principle. In the AP Pollution Control Board versus MV Naidu, Supreme Court has explained the relation between ecological issues and fundamental rights. Environmental concerns arising in courts under Article 32 or 226 or 136 are of equal importance as human rights concern. In fact, both are to be traced back to Article 21, which deals with fundamental right to life and liberty. While environmental aspects concerns life, the human right aspects concerns liberty. For the mains examination, these judgments are very important concerning judicial action in environmental conservation. There is an explained article with regard to general consent. The present state government in Maharashtra has restored the general consent for CBI. Previously, it was taken away by the previous dispensation. See, in this regard, you have to know that CBI draws its power to investigate from Delhi's Special Police Establishment Act 1946. Through this legislation, CBI has been formed, and CBI draws all its investigative power from this act. According to the provision of this legislation, CBI can take any case suo motu in the Union Territory of Delhi. However, in all other states, CBI needs the consent of the state to investigate any cases relating to the state or the cases which falls under the jurisdiction of the state. It's a simple question of federalism. India is a federal state, although it is quasi-federal, but states have autonomy in their own rights. That is why Schedule 7 has divided various subjects for administrative purpose into three lists: state list, concurrent list, and the union list. Law and order falls under the state list. So policing as such is the state subject. So center cannot intervene in the law and order matters of the state. And CBI, which is an investigative policing agency, can only investigate in the state with the consent of the state. This concept is called as the general consent in the matter of CBI investigation. But this does not mean that if states do not give consent to the state, CBI cannot investigate. If Supreme Court of India or any High Court orders the CBI to take up the case, then general consent is not required in that case. Also, in the Union Territory of Delhi, which has a state legislature and a chief minister, consent is not required because here CBI can take the cases suo motu. And on case-by-case basis, if a state government requests for CBI investigation and union government agrees to it, then also CBI can take up the case. There is an article in today's The Hindu, Grazing Animals Important in Mitigating Climate Change. How exactly? See, the article is based on experiments that were conducted from 2005 in the Himalayan region, especially in the Spiti region of Himalayas. And as per the report, large mammalian herbivores like yak, ibex, they play a crucial role in stabilizing the pool of soil carbon in the terrestrial grazing ecosystem. So the title of the article is that grazing animals, they are important in mitigating climate change. How exactly they are important? They are important because they help in stabilizing the carbon in the soil. In the experiment, they had two different kind of plots that they studied. In one of the plot, they did fencing and did not allow any grazing animal to step in. And over the period of a decade, they studied the percentage of carbon in the soil. Similarly, they have another plot that was open for grazing animals to come and graze. And what they have found is this: the soil carbon fluctuated by 30 to 40% in areas devoid of grazing, where they didn't allow any large mammals to graze on the plot because it was fenced. But the soil carbon largely remained stable in places where large mammals continue to graze. So the moral of the story or conclusion of the experiment is that inadequate grazing management can lead to rapid soil carbon loss. And that latter cannot be easily recovered even when the soil management system improves. This is pretty important because soil contains more carbon than all the plants and all the CO2 which is there in the atmosphere. Soil contains around 3 times more carbon which is there in the atmosphere and around 4 times more carbon in all the biomass, plants and animals. So soil is the sink for carbon dioxide which is larger than all the biomass and atmosphere combined. So soil conservation and carbon management in soil is a pretty important business, especially in the context of climate change. It is not just it is a very important carbon sink, but currently soils remove around 25% of world's fossil fuel emission every year. But however, it is also true that most soil carbon is stored in permafrost and in the peat of the Arctic regions or in the boreal ecosystem of North Eurasia and Northern America. Soils in hot, dry region, they store less carbon. See, what happens is when animals and plants die, the dead organic matter remains in the soil for a longer duration before microorganisms break it down and release the carbon into atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And if the soil management is done properly, then the soil pool can be a reliable sink for trapping carbon dioxide gas. In essence, carbon. You also know that the grazing ecosystem, they makes 40% of the Earth's surface. The Earth's land surface, of course. And the grazing ecosystem spans across the grasslands, the savannas, the shrub steppes, and hence protecting the herbivores that keeps the soil carbon stable should be a key priority for mitigating climate change. Now, the thing that you must be wondering is how exactly the herbivores help in stabilizing the pool of carbon in the soil. At this level of research, things are not very clear. We have empirical data that they do help in stabilizing, but how exactly, we do not know very clearly. But however, we do understand that fluctuations in carbon level in the soil is controlled by the percentage of nitrogen. And grazing by herbivores affects the relation between carbon and nitrogen in such a way that the carbon pool in the soil gets stabilized. This is what we know. This is all the explanation that I can offer you at this stage because we do not have details of the research, or perhaps it hasn't been done yet, and the detailed chemistry behind it as to how the higher percentage of nitrogen, how exactly it is helping in stabilizing the level of carbon is beyond the scope of our discussion. So knowing this much can help you in attempting the prelims question and having a crude understanding of the topic. But the issue seems important because almost half of the land that can support life on Earth has been converted to croplands, pastures, and grazing lands. Soils actually have already lost 50 to 70% of the stored carbon. They have contributed to a quarter of the man-made global greenhouse gas emission. The agricultural practices like tilling, planting monocrops, removing the crop residue after the harvest, use of pesticides, fertilizers, overgrazing, all these agricultural practices have exposed the carbon in the soil to oxygen, allowing them to burn off into carbon dioxide. So now it is being suggested that an important piece of puzzle in mitigating climate change is management of the soil, a very important carbon sink. There is an article in today's The Hindu, why users need to wait for 5G implementation. See, as you would already understand that 5G needs a complete overhaul of infrastructure because the frequency bandwidth in which it will be working will be substantially different from 4G. So not only the infrastructure of mobile towers and the other communication equipments, the capability of the mobile handset of users that also needs to be changed. From the exam perspective, we must understand the difference in the functioning of the mobile telecommunication network with the change of G, from 4G to 5G, from 3G to 4G, and likewise.
The G in 5G stand for generation, meaning it is the fifth generation technology. In any area, whenever you have a technological breakthrough or you have a technological revolution, then that is called as a next generation technology. We are calling it 5G technology, meaning in this area of telecommunication, fifth time this is a technological breakthrough. Fifth time telecommunication revolution has happened. When it happened for the first time, we called it 1G. 1G meaning this telecommunication began, and it was an analog technology. You remember those phones in which gol 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 karke ghumate the? That was the analog system. That telecommunication, that was the first way of beginning to telecommunicate. That was 1G. And it supported only voice. The speed, you will be amazed to know, was only 2.4 kbps. 2.4 kbps. But still, it was for the first time you can listen to the voice of a distant person. It was a technological breakthrough. That was 1G. After that, we came into the era of 2G. When we came close to 2000, it was in 1980s, 90s. In 2G, there was a considerable improvement over 1G. Now the system has become digital, first of all. It is no more analog. And now you can send data apart from voice. Remember those smaller phones in early 2000 where you used to send, you might be too young, but you might remember you used to send SMS and MMS and some kind of picture messages. This kind of communication was allowed by those gadgets. So data communication was also there apart from voice communication. And the speed was increased considerably from 2.4 kbps to 64 kbps. So from voice, you have come to data plus voice. Again, it was a technological breakthrough. Then came the time of 3G. In 3G, the speed was much more. From 64 kbps, the maximum speed that one can enjoy in 3G is 2 Mbps. So speed has increased considerably. Mobile internet access was also possible. And this was very crucial. In 2G, you did not have the internet access. You could send some SMS, write some message and send, but internet operability was not there on the phone. Internet operability came for the first time in 3G. Speed was more, internet operability was more, you can send more data, and you could also do, because of internet access, video calling. So again, in the field of telecommunication, you had a technological breakthrough and you came to a next level, next generation, 3G. There was a connecting link between 3G and 4G. Do you know what is that? Do you remember those CDMA phones, GPRS? Yeah, that was the link between 3G and 4G. When the era of 4G came, the speed increased substantially, very high speed. And the cost of the mobile phone data packet transfer was also decreased. From 3G to 4G, when we went, the services were almost the same that you enjoyed in 3G, except for very high speed. But when you came from 3G to 4G, but then there was improvement further.
The speed was further increased by Reliance. Reliance took this initiative of having 4G LTE. LTE stands for long-term evolution. And when LTE service came in 4G, then the speed drastically increased. It came somewhere between 100 Mbps to 1 Gbps. And now you can see videos without buffering, very high resolution, which was not possible in 3G. Then when Reliance launched Jio, in Reliance Jio, you had another service called as VoLTE, VoLTE, meaning voice over LTE. In LTE, what used to happen, if you're on call, if you're using the voice service, then your internet service will not work in 4G. Internet service went back to 3G. In 4G LTE, but in voice over LTE, as the name suggests, voice over LTE, meaning even though you are having voice service, your LTE service will still work. So you will be still connected to 4G. You can talk to someone and still use your internet, 4G internet. That is VoLTE, voice over long-term evolution. UPSC in 2019 has asked this simple question with reference to communication technologies. What are the difference between LTE and VoLTE? They said that LTE is commonly marked as 3G. No, we know that LTE was brought about as part of 4G. LTE is data-only service, which is true, and VoLTE is voice-only service, which is not true. It is voice over, not voice only. VoLTE is voice. You can use the voice service. You can also use LTE service, and you can use simultaneously. LTE is data-only service, which is again false. I mean, LTE is both voice service and data service. But the thing is, in LTE, you cannot do it directly. Sorry, simultaneously. In VoLTE, you could do it simultaneously. But to say that VoLTE is voice only is incorrect. It is voice plus data, and both can be accessed simultaneously. So both the statement was wrong in this question. That is about 4G. Now we are interested to know what is 5G. There is considerable change. When you went from 3G to 4G, your infrastructure was not to be changed. Same tower, same kind of receptors, same kind of emitters, same antennas, everything worked out well. You just have to change the spectrum in which you are working. You have a higher spectrum, and you easily migrated from 3G to 4G. But from here, 4G to 5G, the step is not easy. It is not easy. In 5G, the whole infrastructure will change. You'll have to add too much into the present infrastructure to migrate from 4G to 5G. See, what you will have in 5G, first of all, there will be ultra low latency. This is very important, very, very important. This is one of the most important things about 5G service. Latency will be negligible in millisecond. Latency is the time that a network takes to respond. See, I'm going to tell you very important thing. Now focus here. In 5G, there is certain improvement from 4G. The most important improvement is ultra low latency. Latency is the time that the network takes to respond. For example, if you open up your mobile phone, if you are on 4G network, and definitely in India, you'll be in 4G network here. If you open a site, it won't open immediately. In the jiffy, in that instant, when you click on the URL, enter, it doesn't splash. It takes some time. Sometimes you see the message popping up connecting to google.com or securing the connection or looking for secure connection, whatever, some kind of messaging will be there. And it's 1 second or so it will take to open up the site. That is latency. That is a time lag. That is a time lag that the network takes to respond. You have commanded the network to open something, and the time that the network takes to adhere to your command, that is latency. Latency in 4G is high, considerable, 1 to 3 seconds. It may take even more to open up a site. That is latency, and that is high. That is high. In 5G, the latency will be in milliseconds. So there will be ultra low latency, and there will be implication of this low latency. We'll talk about in a moment. But I'm just giving you the features, characteristics, what you will get in 5G. Latency will be low. Secondly,
The connection density could be high. Presently, in the hotspot of 4G, if 10 people gets connected, it will burn out. The speed will be ultra slow. But that kind of problem will not be there in 5G. In a 5G hotspot, more than 10 people, 20 people can easily get connected. Thirdly, the stable network will be provided by 5G. The call drops that you have, when you go from one place to another, there is a change in the mobile tower that the phone is connected to. Even if it is of the same service provider, but there's some changes and you face problem. The network is not very stable, but that problem will also not be there in 5G. And all these things, apart from very, very high speed, In 4G, the maximum speed that one can touch is 1 Gbps. And this is the frequency band. You understand? When you get a connection internet, the internet service provider give you the frequency band, 100 Mbps, 200 Mbps, but you always know that that speed is never going to be achieved in your device. That is a frequency band, meaning maximum anybody can achieve in that bus that the service provider is using is 100 Mbps or 200 Mbps or 1 Gbps. You yourself will not be able to communicate with the network with the speed of 1 Gbps. You will get a fraction of that. But the maximum frequency bandwidth in 4G is 1 Gbps. So far, in 5G, the testing has been done till 20 Gbps. And it is set to be increased from here, even more. 20 Gbps, it is very, very high. The video file that you have, that is of how much? 200 MB, 300 MB, it's of very high resolution, will be of 1 GB. It is 20 Gbps per second. Your files will be downloaded like this. A heavy video file will be downloaded in 3 seconds. You're not going to get 20 Gbps, but you'll get a fraction of this. Even if you get 1 Gbps, 1 GB file will be downloaded in a second. So these are the 4 things you must have to have in your mind. The latency is very low in 5G. The connection density problem will not be there. You can have a dense connection with one hotspot, and the speed is very high. The reason why all these things will be possible for 5G is you are using a wide frequency spectrum and you will be working on a higher frequency band. There are 2 frequency bands for 5G. Remember, please. One is around 6 gigahertz. From 450 megahertz, it goes till 6 gigahertz. India will be using it around 3.3, 3.4 gigahertz. But this frequency band is internationally used for 5G. This is lower frequency band. In the higher range of frequency band, it goes till in the range of 24 gigahertz to around 52 gigahertz. And if the telecom operator, if the government has given the higher frequency band to the telecom operator, then man, the speed will be very high. It will not just be 20 Gbps, it can go till 50 Gbps.
There is an article in today's The Hindu, when does RBI step in to monitor a bank? The article is in the context of mismanagement in Dhanlakshmi Bank. The article has talked about the deteriorating condition of CAR, the capital adequacy ratio of the Dhanlakshmi Bank. CAR and other important indicators of performance of bank has been discussed in the DNS dated 2nd July 2021 by the king of DNS, Baswase. These are static concepts and these indicators have largely remained the same ever since. So I'm not taking up the discussion all over again. In case you need to brush up the basic concepts regarding the indicators of the financial health of bank, please refer to this particular DNS.